Millionaires bet that the street girl couldn't play the piano, but what she did changed everything. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The cold afternoon wind cut across Fifth Avenue like an invisible blade, making passers-by quicken their pace while holding their coats tighter. Benedict Caldwell walked with the posture of one who was never in a hurry, yet always arrived before everyone else. His Italian shoes tapped on the concrete with a constant, calculated rhythm, each step an affirmation of power and control. At 35, he had built an empire that made other entrepreneurs tremble just at the mention of his name. Technology, real estate, investments. Benedict had his fingers in all the profitable sectors of New York City, and his reputation was as sharp as his business strategy. At that moment, he was coming from a particularly tense meeting with his executives. He had fired 3 of them without blinking, simply because the last quarter's numbers did not meet his expectations. For Benedict, there was no room for mediocrity or excuses. The business world was a jungle where only the strongest survived, and he considered himself the alpha predator. His assistant, Mark, followed a few steps behind, trying to keep up while organizing his agenda on a tablet. The gray New York winter afternoon seemed to perfectly match Benedict's mood. He observed the people around him with a mixture of disdain and indifference. To him, that anonymous mass of workers and pedestrians represented only numbers, statistics, potential consumers, nothing more. His cynical gaze swept across the urban landscape with the same coldness with which he analyzed spreadsheets and financial reports. It was then that something made him stop. In front of the Imperial Academy of Music, one of the city's most prestigious institutions, a small figure stood still. Benedict initially thought it was just another child waiting for her parents, but something in her posture intrigued him. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, was completely motionless before the building's enormous glass window. Her clothes were visibly worn, her battered sneakers had holes in the sides, and the thin coat she wore barely protected her from the cold. Her dark, disheveled hair fell over her thin shoulders, but it was her face that drew the most attention. Her brown eyes were fixed on the window with an intensity Benedict rarely saw in adults, much less in children. She didn't blink, didn't move. She seemed to be in a deep trance. From inside the academy, piano notes floated out to the street, and the girl followed each one as if she could see the music in the air. Her lips moved slightly, whispering something inaudible, and her fingers made small movements in the air, as if she were playing invisible keys. Benedict found himself observing that scene with a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. There was something disturbingly fascinating about that child. She wasn't there begging for handouts or seeking attention. She was completely absorbed in her own world, a world made of music that she could only hear through the glass but never touch. "Mr. Caldwell, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Mark interrupted his thoughts with a respectful but urgent tone. Benedict raised a hand in a gesture that meant silence, and continued observing. Something about that girl bothered and intrigued him at the same time. It was as if she were a misplaced piece in a puzzle he thought he had already solved. Suddenly the girl began to speak. Her voice was low but clear enough for Benedict to hear. "Listen," she murmured, her eyes still fixed on the window. "Nocturne in E-flat major, opus 9, number 2. See how the notes dance between melancholy and hope. Chopin knew exactly how to capture the soul in every chord." Benedict felt something close to shock. A street girl looking like that, talking about Chopin with a familiarity many of his millionaire colleagues didn't possess. He took a few steps towards her, driven by a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. When he was a few feet away, the girl finally turned. Their eyes met, and Benedict expected to see what he always saw on the faces of the less fortunate when they recognized him. Fear, submission, perhaps a desperate attempt to ask for something. But he found nothing of the sort. The girl's gaze was direct, firm, almost defiant. There was a maturity in those brown eyes that didn't match her age, as if she had lived much more than her 7 years suggested. "You know Chopin?" Benedict asked, unable to hide the condescending tone in his voice. His natural arrogance made him doubt that a child in those conditions could truly understand classical music. "Yes," she replied simply, without averting her gaze. "I come here every day. I stand outside and listen to the lessons. I've memorized all the pieces they play. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Liszt, Rachmaninoff. I know them all. Benedict let out a short laugh, more from disbelief than humor. Impossible. You're telling me you learned all that just by listening from outside? Music doesn't need walls or money to get inside you, she said with a simplicity that sounded almost philosophical. It enters through the soul, and the soul doesn't care what you wear or where you live. Those words struck Benedict in a way he didn't expect. He, who had always believed that everything in life had a price, that people's worth was measured by their material achievements, stood before a child who spoke of music and soul with unwavering conviction. It was absurd. It was impossible. And yet something in him wanted to believe. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice losing a little of its initial arrogance. "Isabella," she replied. "Isabella Stone. And your parents? Where are they?" For the first time, the girl's gaze wavered. A shadow of sadness crossed her eyes before she recomposed her expression. "My mother passed away a few months ago. I don't have anyone anymore." Benedict felt a slight discomfort. He wasn't given to sentimentality, but there was something in the way she said it, with a resigned but not defeated acceptance, that touched him. Mark cleared his throat behind him, clearly uncomfortable with the situation and worried about the time. "Very well, Isabella," Benedict said, returning to his calculating businessman's posture. "You say you know everything about music, that you've memorized entire pieces just by listening. That's a pretty bold claim for someone who's never played a real piano." "I know how to play," she said with conviction. "I know all the movements, all the keys. I just never had the chance to show it." An idea began to form in Benedict's mind. It was cruel, he knew it, but his competitive and cynical nature couldn't resist. He wanted to see this girl fail, wanted to confirm his belief that people like her lived in fantasies to escape their miserable realities. And if by some miracle she really could play, well, that would be interesting to say the least. "Then let's do this," he said, crossing his arms and tilting his head slightly, like a predator studying its prey. "I'll give you a chance. Come with me into this academy and play for me. If you're really as good as you claim, if you can impress me, I'll make you an offer that could change your life. But if you fail, if all this is just imagination, you'll accept that the world doesn't work with dreams and fantasies." Isabella stared at him for a long moment, as if measuring not only his words but his very soul. Then, to Benedict's surprise, she nodded. "All right, I accept your challenge." Mark tried to protest about the time, but Benedict silenced him with a look. The board meeting could wait. Something in that moment seemed more important, though he couldn't quite explain what. He headed for the academy entrance, with Isabella following a few steps behind. The doorman, immediately recognizing the famous businessman, opened the door with reverence. "Mr. Caldwell, what an honor," the doorman said, but frowned upon seeing Isabella. "Excuse me, sir, but the girl cannot enter in that condition." "She's with me," Benedict cut in dryly. "Where's the piano?" "We have several rooms, sir. The main hall is empty now, if you wish." "Perfect." They ascended an elegant marble staircase, Benedict's steps echoing with authority, while Isabella's barely made a sound. The walls were decorated with portraits of famous composers and photos of students who had become renowned musicians. It was a temple dedicated to classical music, a place where only the privileged had access. The main hall was impressive. A gleaming black Steinway grand piano occupied the center, surrounded by audience chairs. Tall windows let in the gray afternoon light, and the walls had perfect acoustic treatment. Benedict pointed to the piano with a casual gesture. "It's all yours," he said, sitting in one of the front row chairs. Mark stood beside him, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Isabella walked to the piano as if approaching something sacred. Her fingers touched the smooth surface of the instrument with reverence, and she closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When she sat on the bench, her feet barely reached the pedals, but she adjusted her posture with a naturalness that surprised Benedict. "What will you play?" he asked, crossing his legs and assuming the posture of a judge waiting to be impressed. "What you were listening to when we met," she replied. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major." Benedict smiled sarcastically. It was one of the best-known pieces, but also one of the most technically challenging. For a child who had never played a real piano, it would be impossible. He leaned back in his chair, prepared to witness failure and confirm his beliefs about the world. But then Isabella began to play. The first notes floated through the air with a delicacy that made Benedict straighten in his chair. It wasn't just the technical precision, though that was surprising for someone in her situation. It was the emotion. Each note carried a weight, a story, a soul. Isabella's fingers danced over the keys with a grace that seemed impossible, and the music that emanated from the piano was not just sound. It was pure feeling. Benedict felt something stir within him, something that had been buried under years of cynicism and coldness. Isabella's music wasn't perfect in the technical sense. There were small imperfections here and there, but it was real. It was honest. It was an expression of something so profound he couldn't name it. Mark stood beside him, jaw agape, completely oblivious to appointments and schedules. In the room, time seemed to have stopped. There was only the music, flowing like a river of emotions, telling a story without words. The melancholy and hope Isabella had mentioned were all there, intertwined in every chord. When she played the last note, the silence that followed was absolute. Benedict realized he had been holding his breath. His hands were clenched on the arms of the chair, and his heart beat in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, just a moment, all his certainties about the world, about people's worth, about what truly mattered in life, were shaken. Isabella turned to him, her hands still on the keys, and looked at him with that same direct and penetrating gaze. "You asked me to play," she said simply. "I played." Benedict slowly stood up, still processing what he had just witnessed. He walked to the piano, looking at that small, fragile girl who had just done something he considered impossible. "How?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "How did you learn that?" "I told you," she replied calmly. "Music gets inside you. You just have to be open to receive it." I stayed outside and listened. I saw the students' fingers through the window. I memorized every movement. In my mind, I played along with them, 1,000 times, until my body memorized what my soul already knew. Benedict ran a hand over his face, trying to regain his composure. He had issued a challenge, hoping to prove a point, and instead he had been confronted with something that defied everything he believed. He looked at Mark, who still seemed to be in shock, and then back at Isabella. "You won," he said finally. "I made a promise. If you impressed me, I'd make you an offer. So here it is. Come live with me. I'll give you a home, music lessons with the best teachers, everything you need to develop that talent. But understand one thing. This isn't charity. This is an investment. I believe you can become something extraordinary. And when that happens, I want to be there to see it." Isabella studied him for a long moment, as if reading beyond his words. "What if I say no? Then you go back to the streets, to your life of listening to music through windows, and eventually that talent dies with you. The choice is yours." There was something brutal in Benedict's frankness, but also something true. He wasn't feigning kindness or compassion he didn't feel. He was being honest about his motivations, and somehow that was more respectable than false promises. Isabella got off the piano bench and stood in front of him. Even with all the difference in height and power between them, it didn't seem like she was at a disadvantage. There was a strength in her that transcended circumstances. "I accept," she said, "but not because I need you. I accept because music deserves to be heard, and if you can give me the means to do that, then I will use those means." Benedict felt an involuntary smile form on his lips. What child was this who spoke like an adult and challenged him so naturally? He extended his hand. "Then we have a deal." Isabella shook his hand, and in that moment, without either of them knowing it, something changed. It wasn't just an agreement between a rich businessman and a talented street girl. It was the beginning of a journey that would transform them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. "Mark," Benedict said, turning to his assistant, "cancel my afternoon. We have some things to sort out. Isabella needs clothes, food, and a room prepared in my house. Arrange everything." "Yes, sir," Mark replied, already pulling out his phone to make the necessary arrangements. As they left the academy, Benedict looked at Isabella walking beside him. She observed everything with those keen eyes, absorbing every detail of the world around her, with the same intensity with which she listened to music. He briefly wondered if he had made a mistake, if he was opening his orderly and controlled life to a chaos he couldn't manage. But then he remembered the music. Those minutes when she had played and awakened something within him, something he thought had long been lost, and for reasons he couldn't fully explain, it made it all worthwhile. What he didn't know, as his driver opened the door of the luxury car, and Isabella entered such an elegant vehicle for the first time, was that this encounter was no coincidence, that there were invisible threads connecting their lives in ways that would yet be revealed, and that Isabella's music was not just talent, but also memory, legacy, and a secret that, when discovered, would change everything he thought he knew about his own family and about who he really was. Benedict's mansion was in one of New York City's most exclusive neighborhoods, an area where high walls and security systems protected not just properties but entire lifestyles. When the car passed through the electronic gates, Isabella pressed her face against the window, observing the perfectly manicured gardens and the marble fountain that decorated the entrance. The house itself was an imposing three-story structure, with enormous windows and a facade that blended modernity with classical elegance. "Is this all yours?" Isabella asked in a low voice, her eyes wide, trying to absorb the magnitude of the place. "It's my house," Benedict replied, but there was something in her tone that made him see the mansion through different eyes. Suddenly, all that ostentation seemed excessive, almost vulgar. "You'll get used to it." Mrs. Martha, the housekeeper who had worked for Benedict for over 10 years, was waiting at the entrance. She was a middle-aged woman, with grey hair pulled back in a bun, and a face that usually conveyed efficiency and discretion. Beside her was George, the gardener, a 60-year-old man who had tended the gardens for as long as Martha had worked in the house. Both looked curious and confused. "Mr. Caldwell, Mark had warned me about a visit, but he didn't mention." She paused, choosing her words carefully as she looked at the girl in worn clothes. "A child." "Isabella isn't a visit, Martha," Benedict said with his firm, authoritative voice as he walked towards the entrance. "She's going to live here. Prepare the guest room on the second floor. Provide suitable clothes and make sure she has everything she needs. Oh, and she'll need a piano, a good one. You can use my corporate card for everything." Martha blinked a few times, processing the information. In all her years working for Benedict, she had never seen him act on impulse. He was meticulous, calculating. Every decision was carefully thought out and executed, and now he was bringing home a street girl as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "A piano, sir?" Martha repeated, as if needing to confirm she had heard correctly. "Yes, a Steinway if possible. Or a high-quality Yamaha. Maestro Vincent will come to give lessons. Also, arrange a suitable room for the lessons." George, who had been quiet until then, stepped forward and removed his hat respectfully. "Welcome, little one. If you need anything in the garden, a quiet place to sit or just to see the flowers, just call me." The gardener's simple kindness made Isabella smile for the first time since they had arrived. "Thank you, Mr. George. I really like flowers." "Yes, sir," Martha finally replied to Benedict, her professional demeanor firmly in place, although her doubts were evident in her expression. "Welcome, Isabella. Come with me, I'll show you to your room and prepare a bath." Isabella looked at Benedict as if asking for permission, and he nodded. "Go with her. I have some calls to make." As Martha led Isabella upstairs, Benedict went directly to his office. It was a spacious room with shelves full of business and economics books, a solid wood desk, and an entire glass wall that offered a panoramic view of the city. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did during the day, and stood by the window watching New York City stretch as far as the eye could see. "What have I done?" he murmured to himself, taking a sip of the drink. It was a question he couldn't answer satisfactorily. His life was built on logic, numbers, strategies. There was no room for sentimentality or impulsive decisions, and yet here he was, having brought a complete stranger into his home based on what? A moment of music? A defiant look in a child's eyes? But then he remembered again those minutes at the academy. The way Isabella's music had cut through his carefully constructed defenses and touched something he thought was dead. There was power in that, true talent, and Benedict had always known how to recognize value when he saw it. His cell phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his brother, Raphael Caldwell. "Benedict, I need to talk to you about the Japanese tech company's proposal," Raphael said without preamble. "The numbers aren't making sense. I think they're trying to con us. We can discuss that tomorrow," Benedict replied, surprising himself. He never postponed. Business matters. Tomorrow? Raphael sounded genuinely shocked. "You missed the board meeting today. What's going on?" "Something came up. I'll call you later." He hung up before Raphael could protest and returned to looking out the window. Downstairs in the garden, he could see the indoor pool. The tennis court he never used, the spacious area that had always seemed empty despite all the luxuries. For the first time he wondered if that emptiness wasn't of the space, but of himself. Upstairs, Isabella was experiencing a completely different reality. The room Martha had prepared was larger than any place she had ever slept. The king-size bed seemed enormous, covered with Egyptian cotton sheets and a fluffy duvet. The curtains were a soft blue, and there was a light wood desk, a comfortable armchair by the window, and even a television on the wall. "This will be your room," Martha said, her voice softening a little as she saw the look of awe on the girl's face. "The bathroom is through that door. I'll draw a bath for you while I set out some temporary clothes until we can buy something suitable." Isabella walked slowly around the room, touching things carefully, as if afraid that everything would disappear if she touched too hard. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the desk, felt the softness of the rug under her bare feet, and when she reached the bed, she sat on the edge carefully, almost reverently. "It's so soft," she murmured, running her hand over the duvet. "My mother always said that one day I would sleep in a real bed. She would have been so happy to see me here." Martha stopped at the bathroom door, watching the girl. There was something in the way Isabella spoke of her mother, with so much love and longing, that touched the housekeeper's heart. She had her own children, grown up and living their own lives, but she remembered well what it was like to be a mother. "Your mother must have been a very special woman," Martha said softly. "She was," Isabella replied, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "She worked so hard, but she always found time for me. She always told me I was special, that I had a gift. She used to take me to listen to music in the street, in the squares where musicians played. She said music was the language of the soul." Martha felt her own heart tighten. And she was right. "Now come, let's get you ready for dinner. Mr. Caldwell usually dines at 8 sharp." As the bathtub filled with warm water and bubbles, Isabella explored the bathroom with the same amazed eyes. There were expensive brand toiletries, soft towels piled perfectly, and an enormous mirror that covered an entire wall. "When was the last time you had a real bath?" Martha asked gently. "It's been a few days," Isabella admitted, blushing with shame. "Sometimes I could use the public showers at the shelter, but there wasn't always space. Other times I washed in gas station bathrooms." Martha felt anger at a world that allowed children to live like that, but she kept her voice calm and maternal. "Well, now you have a bathroom all to yourself. You can bathe whenever you want, for as long as you want. After the bath." While Isabella put on clean clothes that Martha had found, temporary and a little too big, the housekeeper brushed her hair carefully. Isabella's dark curls, once clean and untangled, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. For the first time one could truly see the girl's face, delicate and expressive, with those brown eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her years. "You are a very beautiful girl," Martha said, finishing pinning a few strands. "Now you look more like the little princess you should be." "I'm not a princess," Isabella said seriously. "I'm just a girl who likes music." When Isabella came down for dinner, Benedict was waiting in the dining room. He had changed his suit for more casual clothes, but still maintained that aura of authority. When he saw Isabella, clean and properly dressed, something stirred in his chest. She seemed so small and vulnerable, but at the same time there was an undeniable strength in her. "Sit down," he said, indicating the chair beside him. The enormous mahogany table had room for 12 people, but only 2 places were set close to each other. "The table is very big," Isabella observed, sitting down carefully. "Do you eat alone every night?" The question was innocent, but it hit Benedict unexpectedly. "Usually, yes. Sometimes I have business dinners, but most nights it's just me. That must be very lonely." Benedict had no answer for that. He had never thought of his routine as lonely. It was simply his life, efficient and uncomplicated. But now, looking at the enormous table with only 2 places occupied, he saw the loneliness that had always been there. Martha served dinner, a mushroom risotto with steak in a red wine sauce. Isabella looked at the plate with wide eyes. "I've never eaten anything like this," she admitted. "It looks like fancy restaurant food." "It is from a fancy restaurant," Benedict said. "Martha orders from the best kitchens in the city." But as Isabella ate, clearly savoring every bite, Benedict found himself observing her more than eating his own meal. There was something in the way she savored the food, with genuine gratitude for each bite, that made him reflect on how many meals he had eaten, without truly appreciating, just swallowing expensive food as if it were fuel. "May I ask a question, Mrs. Martha?" Isabella said softly. Martha, who was running the bath, stopped and returned to the room. "Of course, dear. And you can just call me Martha." "Why did he do it? Why did Mr. Caldwell bring me here?" Martha sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "To be honest, I don't know either. I've known Mr. Caldwell for a long time, and he's never done anything like this. He's not a man of charity or sentimentality, but something about you must have touched something in him. Perhaps you're lucky, or perhaps you really are as special as he must have seen. I don't want him to think he owes me anything," Isabella said seriously, "or that I owe him anything. I just want to play music." Martha smiled for the first time, a genuine smile that lit up her normally serious face. "Then you're in the right place. That man downstairs loves challenges and achievements. If you have real talent, he'll make sure you reach the top. That's how he works." In the following weeks, life in the mansion settled into a new routine. Benedict hired private tutors for Isabella, not just for music, but for regular studies too. She had missed a lot of school living on the streets, and he insisted that she needed a complete education, not just musical training. The first teacher to arrive was Mrs. Clarice, a 50-year-old woman with decades of experience in education. She came prepared to teach a lagging child, but was surprised by how quickly Isabella absorbed information. The girl was like a sponge, thirsty for knowledge. "She has an extraordinary mind," Clarice told Benedict after the first week of lessons. "Yes, she's behind in some formal subjects, but her reasoning ability and memory are exceptional. In English, she reads at the level of a child 2 years older. And in math, she does mental calculations with impressive speed." Benedict felt a strange satisfaction with those compliments, as if they were directed at him too. "It's her natural talent," he said, but Clarice shook her head. "No, Mr. Caldwell, talent explains the music. This is something different. This is pure intelligence, combined with a willingness to learn that I rarely see. This girl will go far in whatever field she chooses." The piano teacher, Maestro Vincent Cross, a man of almost 70 with decades of experience teaching at the Imperial Academy of Music, arrived a few days later. He had been skeptical when Benedict called, imagining some rich businessman had been fooled by a clever child with a trick. But his years of experience had taught him never to judge before listening. The first lesson was a revelation. Vincent asked Isabella to play something, anything. She chose Bach's Prelude in C major, a seemingly simple piece that revealed much about the performer's musical understanding. When she finished, Vincent sat in silence for a long moment. "How old are you?" he finally asked. 7, Isabella replied. "And how much formal instruction have you had?" "None," she said. "I just learned by listening and observing." Vincent stood up and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He was processing what he had just witnessed. In 50 years of teaching piano, he had never seen anything like it. There were technical imperfections, yes, small errors in posture and fingering. But the musical understanding, the way she interpreted the phrases, the dynamics, the rubato, it was all there. It was as if she had been born knowing. "Mr. Caldwell," Vincent said when Benedict came to check on the first lesson, "this is extraordinary. She has natural talent, yes, but she also has something rarer. She understands the music. Not just the notes, but the soul behind them. With proper training, this girl can become one of the greatest pianists of her generation in the United States." Benedict felt a strange satisfaction with those words. It wasn't just about being right about Isabella's talent, but something deeper, almost paternal, though he didn't recognize it as such. "Then do your job, Maestro. Give her the best possible training. Money is not an issue." But lessons with Vincent were rigorous. He was an old-school teacher, demanding and perfectionistic. In the first few weeks, Isabella often left lessons with tears in her eyes, frustrated by her own technical limitations. "Slower," Vincent would say, tapping his pencil on the music stand. "You're rushing the passage. Technique serves the music, not the other way around. Again from the beginning." One afternoon, Benedict passed by the music room and heard Isabella playing the same passage repeatedly, each time with small variations, seeking perfection. He opened the door softly and saw Vincent standing beside the piano, arms crossed, watching with critical attention. "No," Vincent said after the 10th repetition. "Your fingers are tense. See, He sat beside her and demonstrated. The movement should be fluid, natural, like water flowing over stones. Relax your wrists. Isabella tried again, and this time the passage flowed better. Vincent nodded, a small smile of approval appearing on his normally stern face. Better. 20 times like that, and then we can move on. Benedict watched, fascinated by the dedication of both. When the lesson ended and Vincent left, he entered the room. Isabella was still sitting at the piano, her hands resting in her lap, her shoulders slumped with tiredness. "He's very strict," Benedict commented. "I know," Isabella replied, but not with resentment. "It's because he cares. He sees something in me, and he wants to make sure I don't waste it. My mother used to say that the best teachers are those who demand the most from you, because they believe you can achieve." Mornings at the mansion started early. Isabella woke with the sun, still unaccustomed to the luxury of sleeping in such a comfortable bed. She found she liked waking before everyone else, when the house was still quiet. She would go down to the garden and sit near the fountain, just listening to the birds and feeling the fresh morning air. George, the gardener, was usually there, tending to the plants. He taught Isabella the names of the flowers, showed her how roses needed special care, how orchids were delicate but resilient when well tended. "You know, a little one," George said one morning while pruning the hydrangeas, "plants are like people. Some need a lot of care and attention to flourish. Others are more resilient, they grow anywhere. But all need water, sun, and patience." "Like me," Isabella said thoughtfully. "I grew like a wildflower, with no one really taking care of me. But now I have sun and water." George smiled, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "And you are flourishing, child. I can see it in your eyes. There's still sadness there, but there's hope too. That's good." After these peaceful morning moments, Isabella had breakfast in the enormous kitchen with Martha. The housekeeper quickly discovered that the girl had a surprising appetite, making up for months of inadequate nutrition. But more than that, Martha discovered she had a special talent for making pancakes, the girl's favorite food. "Can I help?" Isabella would ask every morning, and Martha, who initially hesitated, began to let her participate. Together they made pancakes, Isabella learning to stir the batter to the right consistency, to wait for the bubbles to appear before flipping. "My mother and I used to cook together," Isabella said one morning, her voice nostalgic. "She made the best rice pudding. She said it was her grandmother's recipe, passed down through generations." "Perhaps we can try making rice pudding one of these days," Martha suggested gently. "If you remember the recipe." "I remember everything about her," Isabella said with determination. "Every recipe, every song she sang, every story she told. I don't want to forget anything." "And you won't forget," Martha assured, placing a plate of steaming pancakes in front of her. "The good memories are the ones that stay with us forever." Then came the regular lessons: math, English, history. Mrs. Clarice was patient but demanding, and Isabella absorbed everything with an impressive thirst for knowledge. In the afternoon, it was time for piano lessons with Maestro Vincent, which lasted 2 intense hours of practice, theory, and repetition. But what most intrigued everyone in the house were the moments when Isabella played alone. Usually at dusk, when lessons were over and Benedict was still in his office working, she would go to the new grand piano he had installed in the music room, and there she would play. Not the pieces the maestro taught, but her own interpretations, her own emotions translated into music. Benedict found that, increasingly, he made excuses to leave his office during those times. He told himself he was just checking if the investment was worthwhile, if the girl's talent was developing adequately. But the truth was that music did something to him. It calmed the constant agitation of his mind, the incessant urge to conquer, compete, control. Mark noticed the change first. One afternoon, after Benedict cancelled an important meeting for the 3rd time to be home for dinner, the assistant finally asked, "Mr. Caldwell, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you all right? You're, well, different lately." "Different how?" Benedict asked, though he already knew the answer. "More," Mark searched for the right word, "human. Less focused solely on numbers. Yesterday you asked about the cleaning staff's families. I've never seen you do that before." Benedict was quiet for a moment. "The people who work for me have families, lives. They always have. I just never paid attention. Does that seem strange to you?" "Not strange," Mark said carefully. "Surprising, but good. People are noticing. speaking positively. Raphael also noticed. Benedict's brother started showing up more frequently, always with some business excuse, but his eyes always searched for Isabella. One afternoon he arrived unannounced and found Benedict in the garden, watching Isabella and George plant a new rose bush. "Look at you," Raphael said with a tone Benedict couldn't decipher. "The great Benedict Caldwell playing family man. It's almost touching." "What do you want, Raphael?" Benedict asked without taking his eyes off Isabella, who was laughing at something George had said. "Just curious about this sudden transformation. You've always been so focused, so ruthless. And now you're here taking care of a street girl as if she were—" He paused deliberately. "As if she were family." "Perhaps I'm just recognizing what's truly important in life," Benedict replied coldly. "Or perhaps you're going soft. In the business world, that's dangerous. People see weakness, they attack. Caring for a child isn't weakness. It's responsibility. Something you clearly don't understand." Raphael looked at his brother with an expression that mixed envy and something darker. "I just hope you know what you're doing, because bringing her into the family, into our circle, could have consequences you're not anticipating." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fraternal warning," Raphael said, but his smile was cold. "That's all." After Raphael left, Benedict was restless for the rest of the day. There was something in the way his brother had looked at Isabella, something calculating that made him uncomfortable. But he pushed those thoughts away, not wanting to spoil the moment of peace he had found. One night, 2 weeks after Isabella's arrival, Benedict was in his office late when he heard music. It was almost 11 o'clock, and he assumed everyone was asleep. Curious, he followed the sound to the music room. The door was ajar, and through it he could see Isabella sitting at the piano in her pajamas, playing in the dark with only the moonlight coming through the windows. He didn't enter. He stood there watching and listening. The music she played was sad, melancholic, full of a longing that seemed too deep for someone so young. When she finished, she sat in silence for a moment, her hands still on the keys. "Can't you sleep?" Benedict asked softly from the doorway. Isabella didn't seem surprised by his presence. She turned on the bench, and in the faint moonlight her eyes shone with unshed tears. "Sometimes I dream of her, my mother, and when I wake up, for a moment I forget she's gone. Music helps. It makes the pain feel less heavy." Benedict entered the room, sitting in one of the armchairs. It was rare for him to have conversations like this, so stripped of pretense or agenda. What was she like? "Your mother?" Isabella smiled, a small but genuine smile. "She was kind, always tired because she worked so much, but she always found time for me. She used to sing, you know, not classical songs like I play, but old songs, lullabies. She said music was the language of the soul, and that as long as we could sing or play, we would never truly be alone." "And your father?" The smile disappeared. "I never knew him. My mother said he was a good man, but circumstances separated them. She never wanted to talk much about him. I always thought maybe he didn't know about me, or maybe he didn't care." Benedict felt an odd discomfort in those words. There was something in them, some resonance he couldn't identify. He had never had children, never allowed himself that kind of vulnerability. Relationships were complicated, and he preferred the clarity of business. But looking at Isabella, he felt something he couldn't name. "You know," he began, hesitant in a way that was uncommon for him, "my father wasn't very present either. He died when I was 12, leaving behind a failing business and debts. My mother had to work 3 jobs to support us, my brother Raphael and me. That's why I swore I would never be vulnerable like that I would build something no one could take from me." "And you succeeded," Isabella said simply. "You're powerful now. But are you happy?" The question hit him like a punch. No one had ever asked him that. People asked about his businesses, his profits, his achievements. But happiness, that was a variable he had never included in his equations of success. He began, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was, he didn't know the answer. Isabella got up from the piano and walked over to him. In the faint light, she seemed even smaller, more fragile. But when she spoke, there was a wisdom in her voice that defied her age. "Power without joy is just a burden you carry alone. My mother had no money, but she had love, and that love still lives in me, in the music I play, in the memories I keep. That's worth more than any mansion or company." Benedict looked at that girl. This child who had arrived in his life just 2 weeks ago and was already turning his world upside down. Part of him wanted to reject her words, to dismiss them as the naivete of someone who didn't understand how the real world worked. But another part, the part her music had awakened, knew there was truth there. "You are very wise for someone so young," he said finally. "Suffering teaches things that money cannot buy," she replied. "But talent needs opportunity. So I am grateful for what you are giving me, even if your reasons are not pure kindness. Because through this opportunity, I can honor my mother. I can make her music live through me." In that moment, something changed between them. It was no longer just an agreement between a businessman and a protégé. It was something more complex, more human. Benedict didn't know it yet, but that conversation in the music room under the moonlight would be a turning point in his life. "Go to sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow the maestro will be strict with you." Isabella nodded and started to walk towards the door, but stopped halfway. "Mr. Caldwell, thank you for giving me a home, even if temporary, for believing in me when no one else did." He didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice at that moment. He just nodded, and Isabella left, leaving him alone in the music room with his turbulent thoughts. In the days that followed, Benedict began to notice changes in himself. Small things at first. He found himself leaving the office earlier to have dinner with Isabella and Martha. He started asking questions about her lessons, genuinely interested in her progress. For the first time in years, his house felt less like an empty showroom and more like a place where life actually happened. But not everything was rosy. His family began to ask questions. Raphael, his younger brother, showed up unannounced with increasing frequency, always asking questions that seemed innocent but carried an investigative weight. And then finally came the moment Benedict had been avoiding. His mother decided to pay a visit. Augusta Caldwell was a force of nature. At 68, she maintained the erect posture and sharp gaze that had intimidated her sons throughout their childhood. She had raised the two boys alone after her husband's premature death, working 3 jobs and sacrificing everything to ensure they had opportunities. She was a woman who tolerated no nonsense, who saw through lies and evasions as if they were transparent glass. When her black Mercedes pulled up in front of Benedict's mansion that Thursday afternoon, Martha rushed to warn him. "Mr. Caldwell, your mother is here," she said with a worried expression. "And she looks well determined." Benedict sighed. He knew this visit was inevitable. Augusta had called several times since rumors about Isabella began circulating in the family, but he had avoided her calls, sending evasive messages. His mother was not one to give up easily. "Where is Isabella?" he asked. "In the music room with Maestro Vincent. The lesson should end in about 20 minutes. "Good, leave her there. I'll receive my mother in the office." Augusta entered the house as if she owned it, her high heels clicking on the marble with authority. She wore an elegant navy blue suit and pearls around her neck, every inch the family matriarch. Her eyes swept the entrance, noticing subtle changes. There were fresh flowers in the vases, something Benedict had never cared about before. The house seemed somehow more alive. "Mother," Benedict greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "What a surprise. If you had warned me, I would have prepared something." "Precisely why I didn't warn you," Augusta replied dryly. "You've been avoiding me, Benedict Anthony. And when a son avoids his mother, it's because he's hiding something. So I came to see with my own eyes." She entered the office without waiting for an invitation and sat in the leather armchair as if presiding over a meeting. Benedict closed the door and leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. "I'm not hiding anything," he said, but both knew it was a lie. "So it's true?" Augusta asked directly. "You brought a street girl to live in your house? You who always said that family and relationships were unnecessary complications?" "She's not just a street girl. She has extraordinary talent. It was being wasted. There are institutions for that, Benedict. Social programs, specialized schools. You could have donated money, sponsored her studies remotely. But bringing her to live with you? That's not charity, that's—" Augusta paused, searching for the right word. "That's personal. So I ask again, why?" Benedict hesitated. How to explain something he himself was still trying to understand? Why had seeing that girl in front of the academy, so completely absorbed in music, triggered something within him? Why did her defiant eyes and her refusal to be intimidated intrigue him so much? Why did her music do things to his soul that he didn't know he still had? Because when I heard her play, he said finally, it was as if something inside me woke up. Something that had been sleeping or perhaps dead for a long time. She reminded me that there's more to life than spreadsheets and board meetings. Augusta studied her son with those penetrating eyes that always seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. You're growing attached to her. It wasn't a question. Benedict didn't answer, because there was no need. Both knew it was true. At that moment, the office door opened and Isabella entered, still dressed in her piano lesson clothes, her hair slightly disheveled from concentrating so hard. "Excuse the interruption, Mr. Caldwell," she said politely, using the formal address she always used with him in front of others. "Martha said dinner is ready." Isabella stopped when she saw Augusta. The two pairs of eyes met, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, no one moved. Augusta stood completely still, her face losing all color. Her hands gripped the arms of the armchair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Benedict immediately noticed the reaction. "Mother, are you all right?" But Augusta didn't answer. She was fixated on Isabella, her eyes scanning every detail of the girl's face. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her nose, the shape of her mouth. And something in that face was awakening memories, connections she had tried to bury long ago. "You must be Mr. Caldwell's mother," Isabella said, stepping into the room with the natural grace she had developed in recent weeks. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Isabella." Augusta finally managed to speak, though her voice came out hoarse. "Isabella," she repeated. "What is your full name, child?" "Isabella Helen Stone, ma'am." The name Helen hit Augusta like a physical blow. She stood up abruptly, so quickly she almost knocked over the armchair. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with what Benedict identified as deep shock, almost panic. "Helen," Augusta repeated, and now there was something in her voice, an emotion Benedict had never heard before. "Your mother, her name was Helen?" "Yes, ma'am," Isabella replied, confused by the older woman's reaction. "Helen Mary Stone, did you know her?" But Augusta was already backing towards the door. "I need to go. Benedict, we'll talk later." She looked at Isabella one last time, that gaze filled with conflicting emotions. "You are a very special girl, Isabella. Very special indeed." And without further explanation, Augusta practically ran out of the house, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble as she sought the exit. Benedict followed her to the door, completely confused. "Mother, wait! What's going on?" But Augusta was already in the car, her hands trembling so much that it took her a moment to put the key in the ignition. When the engine finally caught, she drove off at a speed uncharacteristic of her normally cautious driving. Benedict returned to the office where Isabella still stood, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. "Did I say something wrong?" she asked softly. "No," Benedict replied, though he himself wasn't sure what had just happened. "You didn't do anything wrong. My mother, He paused, not knowing how to finish the sentence. "She recognized me," Isabella said with that unsettling perception she always had. "Not me exactly, but something about me. Maybe I remind her of someone." "Perhaps," Benedict agreed, but his mind was racing. Augusta's reaction wasn't just surprise or casual recognition. It was deep shock, almost fear. And the name Helen had clearly triggered something. Something important. Something his mother had hidden. What he didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that that encounter had planted a seed of discovery that would soon blossom into revelations that would change everything. Because the name Helen wasn't just Isabella's mother's name. It was a name Augusta Caldwell knew very well, a name from the past she had tried to bury, but which now returned to haunt her in a way she never could have imagined. Augusta's reaction continued to bother Benedict in the following days. He knew his mother. He could read every one of her expressions and what he had seen on that face when Isabella said her full name was not just surprise. It was shock. It was recognition. It was fear. He tried to call her several times, but Augusta avoided his calls, sending short messages saying she was busy or not feeling well. It was unusual. His mother had always been direct, confrontational when necessary. This evasion was not typical of her. Meanwhile, life with Isabella continued to transform Benedict's routine in subtle but significant ways. He found himself smiling more, something his employees noticed with evident confusion. During business meetings, His mind sometimes wandered, wondering how Isabella's piano lesson was going that day. It was disconcerting for a man who had always had absolute control over his thoughts and emotions. One morning, 3 weeks after Isabella's arrival, Benedict was in his office reviewing contracts when Mark entered with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Caldwell, I have something I need to show you," Mark said, placing a folder on the desk. "What is this?" Benedict asked, opening the folder to find documents, old photos, and newspaper clippings. "After your mother's reaction that day, I got curious. I hired a private investigator to find out more about Isabella's past. And well, he found some interesting things. Disturbing, even." Benedict felt a knot in his stomach. Part of him wanted to close that folder and never look again. But the other part, the part that had built an empire based on information and knowledge, needed to know. He began to read. Isabella Helen Stone had been born 7 years ago in a small public hospital in New York City. Her mother, Helen Mary Stone, was a nurse who worked double shifts to support her daughter alone. There was no father listed on the birth certificate. Helen had refused to name the father, and all attempts to discover his identity over the years had been blocked by her. "What's strange," Mark continued as Benedict read, "is that Helen Stone wasn't poor. She came from a middle-class family, had an education, could have had a comfortable life, but she chose to live modestly, almost hidden, as if she were fleeing from something or someone." Benedict turned another page and found an old photograph. It was of Helen, younger, perhaps in her early 20s. She was at a party, and beside her, with his arm around her, was a man. Benedict's heart stopped for a moment. The man in the photo was his uncle, Damien Caldwell. Damien, his father's older brother, had been a controversial presence in the family. A successful businessman, but also known for his questionable behavior with women, for his business dealings, and for a character that the Caldwell family itself preferred not to discuss. He had passed away 8 years ago, leaving his fortune to charities in a move that surprised everyone, as if he were trying to buy redemption in the end. "Go on," Benedict said, his voice tense. Mark, noticing the change in his boss's demeanor, hesitated before continuing. The investigator managed to speak with some people who knew Helen. A former colleague mentioned that Helen had a relationship with a wealthy man about 8 years ago, but that he abandoned her when he found out she was pregnant. Helen never revealed who this man was, but, he paused significantly, the timing perfectly coincides with Isabella's pregnancy. Benedict closed his eyes, processing the information. The pieces were beginning to fit together in a way he didn't want to accept. His mother's reaction, the name Helen, the photo with Damien, and now the revelation that Helen had been abandoned by a wealthy man exactly when Isabella was conceived. "You're suggesting that Damien was Isabella's father?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The evidence points strongly in that direction." "If it's true, that means Isabella is," Mark swallowed hard, "your cousin, your uncle's daughter." Benedict stood up abruptly, walking to the window. His mind was in a whirlwind. This meant he had brought home not a stranger, but family. Blood of his blood. And worse, it meant that Damien, that man the entire family despised but tolerated for his money, had abandoned Helen and his daughter to live in poverty while he swam in wealth. "My mother knew," Benedict said aloud, more to himself than to Mark. "When Isabella said her full name, she recognized her. She must have known Helen, must have known about all this." "What are you going to do?" Mark asked cautiously. "I'm going to find out the truth," Benedict replied with determination. "And then I'm going to do what should have been done a long time ago." That night, Benedict drove to his mother's house without warning. Augusta lived in a smaller mansion than his, but still elegant in a quiet neighborhood. When she opened the door and saw her son there with an expression that brooked no refusal, she sighed resignedly. "I knew you'd come," she said, letting him in. "You've always been too stubborn to let things lie." They sat in the living room, the same place where Benedict had spent so many childhood afternoons. Augusta served tea, her hands trembling slightly, which was rare for that usually so firm woman. "Tell me about Helen," Benedict said bluntly. "Tell me about Damien and Helen Stone." Augusta took a long sip of tea before replying. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was laden with regret. "Helen was a lovely girl. I met her at a charity event about 8 years ago. She was a nurse, worked at the hospital the family sponsored. Your Uncle Damien met her on the same occasion, and, Benedict pressed, and he did what he always did. Seduced her with promises, with his superficial charm and his money. Helen fell in love, poor thing. She was young, innocent, believed everything he said. When she got pregnant, Damien sought her out and offered her money to, Augusta paused, disappear, to terminate the pregnancy and vanish from his life. Benedict felt anger burn in his chest. And she? She refused. Said she would keep the baby, that she didn't need him or his dirty money. Damien was furious. He threatened her, said he would use his power to destroy her life if she tried to expose the relationship or ask for support. Helen then simply disappeared. She changed hospitals, cut contact with everyone who knew her, lived hidden. And you knew all this? Benedict's voice was filled with accusation. You knew there was a child, your granddaughter, living in poverty, and you did nothing. Augusta placed the teacup on the table with trembling hands. She began, tears finally starting to fall. I tried to find her. When I learned of the pregnancy, I went after her. I wanted to help, wanted to do the right thing. But she had completely disappeared. I hired investigators, searched hospitals, nothing. It was as if she had evaporated. And Damien made it clear that if I kept looking, I would cause problems for the entire family. He had power, he had connections. She sobbed, I was a coward. I chose to protect the family I had, and abandoned the one I could have had. And when Damien passed away? Why didn't you look then? I thought it was too late. I thought Helen had rebuilt her life, found someone else. I never imagined, she looked at Benedict with eyes full of remorse. I never imagined they were living in such misery, that the girl would end up on the streets. Benedict stood up, unable to sit still. So Isabella is my cousin. Damien was her father. Yes, Augusta confirmed softly, and that makes her my granddaughter. The granddaughter I abandoned out of fear and cowardice. Is there any proof? Documents, letters, anything that confirms this definitively? Augusta went to her office and returned with a small box. Inside were letters, photos, and a document. After Damien passed away, I found these things among his belongings. He had kept everything. Photos of Helen, letters she wrote but he never answered. And this, she pulled out a sealed envelope. A paternity test he secretly took when Isabella was born. He knew she was his daughter. He was sure. And still he abandoned her. Benedict took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was the DNA test result, confirming with 99.9% certainty that Damien Caldwell was the biological father of Isabella Helen Stone. He felt a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at Damien, disappointment with his mother, but above all an iron determination. Isabella was family. She was his blood, and he would not abandon her as Damien had done. She can't know, Augusta said suddenly. Not now. She's too young. She's been through too much trauma. This revelation could destroy her. Benedict looked at his mother sternly. You no longer have the right to make decisions about her. You lost that right when you chose silence. Please, Benedict, I'm begging you. Let her stabilize, let her find some peace. When the time is right, when she's strong enough, then we can tell her the truth. But not now. Against his will, Benedict recognized the logic in those words. Isabella was just beginning to recover from the trauma of losing her mother and living on the streets. This revelation, so vast and complex, could indeed be too much for her right now. For now, he agreed reluctantly. But she will know the truth. And when she does, it will be because I chose the right moment, not because you're trying to protect your conscience. Fair enough, Augusta said softly. And Benedict, she looked at her son with a pleading expression. Can I get to know her properly? Can I try to be the grandmother I should have been from the start? Benedict considered for a long moment. That depends on you proving you deserve it, that you've changed, that you won't disappear again when things get difficult. He left Augusta's house with more questions than answers. On the way back to his mansion, his mind wouldn't stop processing everything. Isabella was family. That changed everything, but at the same time it changed nothing. He had already committed to taking care of her before he knew the truth. But now there was an additional weight, a responsibility that went beyond a simple agreement or investment. When he arrived home, it was late at night. He expected everyone to be asleep, but as he entered, he heard music coming from the music room. It was Isabella, playing as she always did when something bothered her. He went there and stood at the door, watching. She played a piece he had never heard before, something sad but also hopeful, like a farewell that was also a beginning. When she finished, she turned and saw him there. "Are you all right?" she asked, and Benedict almost laughed at the irony. Here was a 7-year-old girl who had lost everything, asking if he was all right. "I should be the one asking that question," he said, entering the room and sitting down. "But I am all right," she replied simply. "I have a home, I have music, I have people who care." "You look sad. Did something happen?" Benedict looked at her, really looked, and for the first time saw not just talent or responsibility but family. He saw his grandmother Augusta's eyes, the shape of her face that vaguely resembled his Uncle Damien, but also something completely unique, completely Isabella. "Sometimes we discover things about our past that change how we see the present," he said carefully. "But not all changes are bad. Some help us understand who we truly are." Isabella tilted her head, studying him with that perceptive gaze. "You found out something about me. About my mother." It wasn't a question, it was an affirmation. Benedict shouldn't have been surprised. The girl had always been too observant, too sensitive to the emotions around her. "I discovered some things," he admitted, "but for now I want you to know only this. You are safe here, safer than you've ever been. And it's not just because I made a promise or because you have talent. It's because you deserve it, because you are special in ways that go beyond music." Isabella got off the piano bench and walked to him. Without asking permission, she climbed onto his lap and hugged him, something she had never done before. Benedict was stiff for a moment, unaccustomed to physical displays of affection, but then slowly his arms closed around her and he hugged her back. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered against his shoulder. "Not just from the streets, but from loneliness. I was so lonely, so lost. And you found me." Benedict felt something wet in his own eyes and realized, shocked, that they were tears. He hadn't cried since he was a child, since the day his father passed away. But there, holding that girl who was his cousin, his responsibility, his redemption, the tears came. "We found each other," he corrected softly. "Because I was lost too, Isabella. I just didn't know it." They stayed like that for a long time, two human beings whom life had hurt in different ways, finding solace in each other. And when they finally separated, something fundamental had changed between them. It was no longer protector and protected, investor and investment. It was family, in the deepest and truest sense of the word. But in the corners of the mansion, in places where the light didn't fully reach, shadows stirred. Because not everyone in the Caldwell family was happy with Isabella's presence. Raphael, Benedict's brother, was starting to ask questions, and the answers he was getting made him increasingly nervous. Because if Isabella was truly Damien's daughter, that meant she had rights. Rights to the inheritance Damien had left to charity. Rights to properties and investments that the family had assumed as their own. And for a man like Raphael, who had always lived in the shadow of his more successful brother, who had always envied Benedict's success, the idea of further dividing the family fortune was unacceptable. He would start making his own moves, hatching his own plans. And when he did, it would test not only the blood ties that bound the Caldwell family, but also how much Benedict was truly willing to sacrifice for the girl who had entered his life by chance, but remained by destiny. The next few months brought subtle but profound changes in Benedict's life. He remained the ruthless businessman in board meetings, but something fundamental had shifted in his essence. He began to question decisions he would previously have made without blinking, to consider the human impact of his corporate actions. His employees noticed the difference, some with relief, others with distrust. Isabella flourished under the care she received. Her piano lessons progressed at an impressive pace, and Maestro Vincent often commented that she had the potential to become one of the greatest pianists in the United States. But more important than her musical progress was her emotional transformation. The sad lost girl Benedict had found in front of the academy was becoming a happier, more confident child, though she still carried the shadow of her mother's loss. Augusta had also begun to visit regularly. At first, Isabella was confused by the attention from the woman who had reacted so strangely at their first meeting. But Benedict simply introduced Augusta as his mother, who wanted to get to know the talented girl living with him better. Isabella, ever perceptive, sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. She had learned on the streets that sometimes it was better to let adults keep their secrets until they were ready to share them. The relationship between Augusta and Isabella developed cautiously, but genuinely. Augusta, consumed by guilt and regret, was determined to be the grandmother she had never been. She took Isabella for walks in the park, bought her books and musical scores, and most importantly, she listened. She listened to the stories Isabella told about her mother Helen, about the struggles they faced, about the dreams they shared. And with each story, the weight of what Augusta had failed to do became more unbearable. Raphael, on the other hand, became an increasingly tense presence in their lives. He showed up unannounced, asking questions about Isabella that seemed innocent but had an investigative edge. Benedict realized his brother was plotting something, but he couldn't quite figure out what. The situation came to a climax one Saturday afternoon, 3 months after Isabella's arrival. Benedict had organized a small recital at his house for Isabella to showcase what she had learned. Only close family were present: Augusta, Raphael, Maestro Vincent, Martha, and Mark. It was meant to be an intimate and special event. Isabella was nervous, which was understandable. It was her first real performance, even for a small audience. Benedict found her minutes before the recital, standing by the music room window, looking out at the garden. "Scared?" he asked gently. "A little," she admitted. "What if I disappoint everyone? What if I'm not as good as they think?" Benedict knelt beside her, looking into the brown eyes that so reminded him of his family. "Isabella, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. The talent you have, the passion you put into your music, that's real. That's yours. And no matter what happens today, He hesitated because the words didn't come easily to him. "I am proud of you, not for your talent, but for who you are." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "I wish my mother were here to see this so much. She always believed in me, even when we had nothing." "I know," Benedict said softly. "And perhaps in some way she is. Perhaps she's in every note you play, in every melody that flows from your fingers." Isabella hugged him quickly before straightening up, wiping away her tears. "I'm ready." The music room had been specially prepared for the occasion. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle around the piano, and flowers decorated the room. When Isabella entered, everyone stood and applauded, making her blush. She sat at the piano, adjusted her posture, and for a moment was silent, her hands on the keys. Then she began to play. The piece she chose was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same one she had played on the day she met Benedict. But this time it was different. The technical progress was evident, but more than that, there was an emotional maturity in the interpretation that left everyone mesmerized. She played not just with her fingers, but with her soul. Benedict watched, completely absorbed. He remembered the day he had challenged her, when he thought he was about to expose the fantasy of a desperate child. How wrong he was, how he had underestimated not only her talent, but the transformative power that encounter would have on his own life. When Isabella finished, the silence was absolute for a few seconds before applause erupted. Augusta was openly weeping, and even the usually reserved Maestro Vincent wiped his eyes. It was a performance not only technically impressive, but emotionally devastating. "Magnificent," Maestro Vincent said when the applause subsided. "Isabella, you have a brilliant future ahead of you." But it was Raphael who broke the magic of the moment. Standing at the back of the room, he began to applaud slowly, a sarcastic smile on his face. Truly impressive. And to think it all started by pure coincidence. Or did it? Benedict felt his body tense. "Raphael, this is neither the time nor the place." "No." Raphael walked to the center of the room. "I think it's exactly the time. Everyone here deserves to know the truth, don't they? The truth about who our little prodigy really is." "Raphael, no." Augusta stood up, her voice trembling, but Raphael ignored his mother. "Do you know who her father is?" he said, pointing at Isabella. "Our dear departed Uncle Damien." "That's right. This girl isn't just a poor thing Benedict decided to help out of kindness. She's family. She's an heiress." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella went pale, looking from Raphael to Benedict and back. Martha covered her mouth in shock, and Mark stepped forward, as if wanting to intervene. "Is it true?" Isabella asked, her voice small and broken. "You knew?" Benedict felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. He had planned to tell her when the time was right, when she was stronger. But Raphael had taken that choice from him, exposing the truth in the cruelest possible way. "Yes," Benedict admitted, his voice hoarse. "I found out a few months ago, but I wanted to wait, wanted you to be ready." "Ready?" Isabella's voice rose. "Ready to find out that my whole life was a lie? That my mother hid me from an entire family? That you took me in not out of kindness but out of obligation?" "No," Benedict said firmly, walking towards her. "I took you in before I knew the truth, remember? I gave you a home when you were just a stranger to me. The discovery that we are family only made me care even more." "How convenient," Raphael interrupted. "And how convenient that now she lives here, being trained by the best, all with family money. Money that should be divided among the true heirs, not wasted on—" "Finish that sentence and you'll regret it," Benedict said with a coldness that made Raphael take a step back. "Isabella is family. She has as much right to be here as any of us. Oh, so let's talk about rights." Raphael pulled an envelope from his pocket. "I've hired my own lawyers. If she really is Damien's daughter, then she has a right to the part of the inheritance he left. Millions that went to charity could be contested. And you know what that means. It means years of legal battles, public exposure, destruction of the family's reputation." "You don't care about the family," Benedict said with disdain. "You care about money. And you don't," Raphael shot back. "The great Benedict Caldwell, so noble now. But remember how you got to the top? Stepping on whoever was necessary without looking back. Don't pretend you've changed just because you found a pretty little girl who plays the piano." "I have changed," Benedict said, and for the first time in his adult life, he fully believed it. "And you know why? Because she showed me what I had become. A rich but empty man, powerful but alone. Isabella reminded me that there's more to life than achievements and numbers in bank accounts." "What a touching speech," Raphael scoffed. "But the reality is you now have a choice. Either you join me in contesting the validity of Damien's paternity, protecting the family's interests, and ensuring this girl doesn't destroy everything we've built, or you stand by her and face the consequences." "Then I choose her," Benedict said without hesitation, without doubts, without regrets. "I choose Isabella." Raphael seemed genuinely surprised. "You're willing to lose everything for her?" "Everything I could lose is worth nothing compared to what I've gained since she entered my life," Benedict replied. "And if you can't see that, then you are poorer than anyone on the streets." Raphael looked around the room seeking support, but found only disapproving faces. Even Mark, who had worked with him on some projects, looked at him with contempt. "You'll regret this," Raphael said finally, before stomping out. When the door slammed shut, everyone turned to Isabella. She was still standing near the piano, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling. Augusta approached first, falling to her knees before the girl. "Isabella, my dear, forgive me," Augusta said, sobbing. "I am your grandmother. I should have been there for you and your mother from the beginning. I failed you in unforgivable ways, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to try to do things differently now. I'd like to be the family you deserve." Isabella looked at Augusta, then at Benedict. "My mother never talked about family. I thought we had no one, that we were alone because that's how it had to be. But she," her voice broke, "she was protecting us, wasn't she, from a man who didn't want us?" "Yes," Benedict said softly, approaching and kneeling beside Augusta. "Damien was a flawed man, Isabella. He made terrible choices. But those choices don't define who you are. Your mother loved you more than anything. She chose to protect you, to give you a life away from a family that could hurt you. She was the strongest person I've ever known, even though I never had the chance to meet her." "And you?" Isabella asked, looking directly at Benedict. "Why did you really help me? Was it pity? Obligation? Guilt?" Benedict took a deep breath, preparing for the rawest honesty of his life. "At first it was arrogance. I wanted to prove a point. Wanted to see you fail to confirm my cynical beliefs about the world. But then you played and something changed. You showed me that I was wrong about everything. And when I found out we were family, yes, I felt obligation. But more than that, I felt joy. Joy at having found you, at having the chance to do what Damien didn't, to be the family your mother deserved to have found." He extended his hand to her. "Isabella, you don't need us if you don't want to. I can ensure you have everything you need. Education, housing, musical training, without asking anything in return. But we would like, if you would give us the chance to be your family. For real." Isabella looked at the extended hand for a long moment. Then she looked at Augusta, who was still on her knees waiting. She looked at Martha, who was silently weeping near the door. She looked at Maestro Vincent, who watched the scene with a mixture of sadness and hope. "My mother," Isabella said finally, her voice firmer now, "always taught me that family isn't just blood. It's who chooses to stand by you, who chooses to love you even when it's difficult. You hurt me today, finding out you lied to me, but I understand why. And I choose to forgive because," she took Benedict's hand, "because I also choose you as family." Augusta sobbed loudly and pulled Isabella into a hug. Benedict joined them, and for a moment the three stood there, a broken family but reassembling itself, finding healing in the fissures the past had created. In the months that followed, life found a new balance. Raphael, true to his threat, tried to initiate legal proceedings, but found he had little support. Most of the Caldwell family, when they learned the full story, sided with Benedict and Isabella. Some even offered financial and emotional help. Benedict made significant changes in his life. He began to delegate more in business, spending more time at home. He slowed the relentless pace of work he had maintained for years, and, most surprisingly, he began to use his fortune in more meaningful ways, creating scholarship programs for talented children from underprivileged communities, ensuring that no other child with Isabella's gift would be lost for lack of opportunity. Isabella's interrupted performance was rescheduled, this time in a public theater open to the community. It was an absolute success. Music critics praised not only her technique, but the profound emotion she managed to convey. Offers for future performances began to arrive. But the most important moment was none of these public achievements. It was a quiet afternoon, 6 months after the big revelation. Benedict and Isabella were in the garden, he reading reports while she practiced on her new portable piano. Augusta was there too, knitting and occasionally humming along with the music. "You know," Isabella said suddenly, stopping playing, "I still miss my mother every day. That pain never completely goes away." "And it shouldn't," Benedict replied. "The love you feel for her is part of who you are. But now you have more people to love, and more people who love you. Not to replace your mother, but to honor what she built in you." Isabella smiled, that smile that completely transformed her face. "She taught me to dream. You are teaching me that dreams can come true. And together," she played a few soft notes on the piano, "we make beautiful music." Augusta wiped tears from her eyes, and Benedict felt that familiar surge of emotion that he no longer tried to suppress. Looking at Isabella, seeing the girl who had transformed his life so completely, he realized that a person's worth truly wasn't in their material or financial achievements. It was in their capacity to love, to forgive, to transform pain into beauty. Isabella had lived on the streets, had lost almost everything, but had never lost her humanity, her kindness, her music. And by keeping them, she had saved not only herself but also him. The sun began to set over New York City, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. In the mansion that no longer seemed so empty or cold, an improbable but true family had found its place. A family built not on perfection or obligation, but on choice, forgiveness, and love. And as Isabella resumed playing, her notes floating through the garden and blending with the sounds of the city in the distance, Benedict closed his eyes and simply listened. He wasn't thinking about business or strategies. He was just present there in that perfect and imperfect moment. And for the first time in his adult life, Benedict Caldwell was truly at peace. Because he had learned the most important lesson, that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts or properties, but in shared moments, in lives touched, and in the love we choose to give and receive. And thanks to a 7-year-old girl with extraordinary talent and an even bigger heart, he finally understood what truly mattered in life. The music continued, filling the air with hope and promise. And in that garden in New York City, under the twilight-colored sky, 3 people whom fate had hurt in different ways found healing and redemption in the family they had chosen to be. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of Benedict and Isabella's journey, a story that began with a seemingly casual encounter on the streets of New York City, but which turned out to be the meeting of 2 souls who needed each other to become complete. Benedict, the cold and cynical businessman, found his humanity through the music and love of a girl who had every reason to be just another statistic, but chose to be extraordinary. And Isabella, the girl who had lost everything, discovered that family is not just those born with us, but those who choose to stand by our side. If this story touched your heart the same way Isabella's music touched Benedict's life, we would love to hear from you. Write in the comments what moment moved you the most, or tell us about a time when you discovered that family goes beyond blood ties. Your story can inspire other listeners, just as we hope Benedict and Isabella's story has inspired you. To continue following stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By clicking here on the side, you will find a special playlist with other narratives about family, redemption, and the transformative power of love. Each story has been carefully selected to touch your heart and make you reflect on what truly matters in life. If you liked this story, leave your like. This simple gesture helps us continue to bring quality content. Stories that not only entertain but make us think, feel, and grow as human beings. And don't forget to activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Every day we publish new narratives that explore the complexity of life, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. Before we go, I leave you with a reflection that Isabella herself taught us. A person's true worth is not in what they possess, but in what they are capable of giving, feeling, and transforming. May we all, like Benedict, have the courage to open our hearts to the transformations that life offers us, even when they come wrapped in ways we didn't expect. Thank you for joining us this far. Until the next story, and may the music of life continue to play melodies of hope in your hearts.